Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see so many people online. A few names we can recognize already. My name is Raphael. I'm the Environmental and Social Impact Lead at UNEP, Climate Finance Unit. It's my pleasure to be your host today. And I'm joined by a team that you can see on screen. Joanna will help me moderate the discussion. A bit of housekeeping before we start. If you haven't done so, feel free to rename your profile with the organization you work for, so we know where you're joining from. The event is on the record. If that's an issue for you, let us know. You all know by now the raise hand and the chat function to post your questions or to follow up questions. And please make sure your microphone is on mute just to avoid echoing sounds. So we are part of a webinar series. This is the first webinar of a series, part of the Land Use Impact Hub. Some of you may know us already. Our work on environmental and social impact is captured in this online tool, which is a collection of guidance document to help you harmonize environmental and social impact monitoring, particularly dedicated for sustainable land use finance. If you haven't done so, Mika, if you can just post the link, you will see on this platform a flagship tool that we call the KPI directory, which is essentially a list of 19 KPIs to harmonize monitoring reporting of ENS areas such as biodiversity conservation, climate adaptation and mitigation, forest protection, and sustainable livelihood. All this is building on lessons learned from funds and facility we worked with over the last 3 to 5 years at UNEP, and I name just a few: Green, Agri3, the Responsible Commodity Facility. You'll hear from Pedro later on today, as well as IFAC and other funds such as the RSCF. Today's webinar, as I said, is the first of a series. We'll be discussing cutoff dates in land use systems as a risk management tool for land use finance. Why did we choose this topic to open up the series? Well, simply because it's been discussed quite often lately, particularly as part of the EU Green Deal and the numerous directives and regulations that emerged end of 2022. And we thought it would be a good chance, good opportunity to help clarify what is a cutoff date, how to implement it, how to set it up. And so we hope by the end of this hour, you'll understand what a cutoff date is. You'll hear from best practices and guidance from the Accountability Framework Initiative and others. And we hope to also share with you practical issues and challenges, and above all, solutions on deciding on and implementing cutoff dates. So again, feel free to post your questions in the chat. We'll have time for Q&A after the presentations. And with this, I'd like to introduce the 3 speakers. We'll first hear from Leah Sandberg, who's the lead scientist at Rainforest Alliance, the Accountability Framework Initiative. We'll then be hearing from Leandro Baumgarten, who is the Zero Conversion Commodity Strategy Scientist at the Nature Conservancy, and Pedro Muracosta, the CEO of Sustainable Investment Management and the founder of the RCF. So you'll be hearing all about those facilities, funds, and best practices. We may have a chance, either in the room or online, to hear from a surprise guest at the end of those 3 interventions. Joanna will introduce that person in a minute. So first, if I may just ask Leah to open the floor, please.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. I'm Leah Sandberg. I'm a lead scientist for global policy at the Rainforest Alliance and at the Accountability Framework Initiative. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give a really high-level overview to get the ball rolling today on cutoff dates. I'm going to talk about sort of what are they, why are they important, and when should they be, which is the trickiest piece of it. I'm going to go through that and then happy to answer questions. I think at the end there's going to be time for that. So next slide, please. So before I get into the what, why, and when, a quick background. What is the accountability framework? I think many of you are probably familiar, and if you're not, it's great to help you get familiar. So the Accountability Framework Initiative is a coalition of 26 civil society organizations, the logos are all seen here, who have worked together to develop consensus-based principles, guidance, and definitions for achieving agricultural and forestry supply chains free of deforestation, conversion of other natural ecosystems, and human rights abuses. So it's really a broad-ranging collaborative effort to support transformation on these topics. The framework itself was launched in 2019, and we've sort of been continuously updating it, supporting companies, financial institutions, other stakeholders in uptake of the framework and its principles. So if this is something that's new to you and you are interested to get in touch, please do. So that's the background on where this is all coming from. So all the guidance that I'll be talking about now is based in the accountability framework and therefore in this consensus process among all of these organizations. So next slide, please. So what's a cutoff date? Quite simply, a cutoff date is the date after which deforestation or ecosystem conversion renders a production area non-compliant with a no deforestation or a no conversion policy or commitment. So if the goal is no deforestation or no conversion, the cutoff date answers the question, since when? If you're, every piece of agricultural land was converted at some point. If you're going to be measuring deforestation, if you're going to say we're not going to have any deforestation, you need to be able to say no deforestation since when, and that's your cutoff date. So pretty basic concept to get us all started. Next slide, please. So why is this important? There's a sort of two primary reasons why this cutoff date is important. The first is it said that a policy or commitment related to deforestation or conversion can't be interpreted, monitored, or reported on without a cutoff date. Any sort of numbers about land use change don't have a lot of meaning without the sort of time frame being involved. So it's really essential for this interpretation and monitoring piece. It's also essential as a communication tool. So inclusion of cutoff dates in purchasing contracts, supplier codes, other policies allows for clear communication from a company to its suppliers about what material will and will not be accepted into supply chains. So it's really essential to be able to operationalize these policies and commitments by companies to communicate what is expected of its suppliers, of the production in its supply base. Next slide, please. So to the meat of the issue here, which is when should the cutoff date be? There are many cutoff dates. The accountability framework does not specify a specific cutoff date that needs to be used in all cases, but we do provide a set of guidelines around best practice. The first is that cutoff dates have to be in the past. That is prior to the issuance of a policy or commitment. So there can't be a situation where a company says, okay, now in 2023, we're committing to no deforestation with a cutoff date of 2024, which basically says, we can keep on clearing for a year and then, we'll stop after that. So that's not aligned with best practice according to the framework. So they need to be predating the issuance of the policy. The second piece of generalized guidance we give is that if a cutoff date exists or is already commonly used in a given commodity or given location, companies should use this date to support aligned action and stronger market signals. So existing cutoff dates often are associated with certification schemes. So the RSPO in palm, FSC in timber and wood products have clear cutoff dates that are commonly used across those sectors. So companies that are sourcing a lot of RSPO or FSC material or Rainforest Alliance material or any other sort of certified product should try to align all of their sourcing with the cutoff dates associated with those certification schemes for the sake of consistency. There's also cutoff dates that exist associated with regulations, such as the Amazon Storm Moratorium and the Forest Code. So obviously companies need to apply, align with these regulatory requirements and the cutoff dates that are associated with those. In the absence of existing cutoff dates, the accountability framework does say that for deforestation, cutoff dates should be no later than 2020. The idea being that there are already many existing policies, agreements, increasingly regulation that uses this cutoff date for forests. It's a well-known and agreed upon date, and therefore companies setting no deforestation policies can have a cutoff date prior to 2020, but it's not best practice to have one later than 2020 for forests. For other ecosystems, we do not specify a specific date. There's delays in the monitorability, in the shared understanding of these other non-forest ecosystems that hopefully we're working very quickly to resolve. But we don't specify a specific cutoff date other than, as was said, they must be in the past, they must be prior to the issuance of a policy. They should align with existing dates when possible. And then one final point is that the timing of the cutoff date within the year can be selected based on whatever the relevant criteria are. For example, regular land clearance cycles, harvest cycles, other considerations, weather patterns for remote sensing, et cetera. So whether the cutoff date is in January and August and December, there is sort of a lot of leeway to make that decision based on the most relevant cycle of the year in the place being monitored. So just a really quick snapshot to give a sense of where many companies are on this matter. This is data from the 2021 CDP forest disclosures. So what was found there is, of the companies that made no deforestation, no conversion commitments in 2021, about 3/4 of those disclosed a cutoff date. So this is widely used. It's something that's done in practice. But as you'll see, these cutoff dates are all over the place for these commitments. You can go back one, thanks. So sort of the darker bottom colors are earlier cutoff dates, pre-2005, 2005 to 2007. As you go up and it gets lighter, those dates get later. And then that gray is commitments that aren't associated with cutoff dates, at least through the disclosure. So you'll see that this is commonly used. The dates range from pre-2005 up through 2020 for all the commodities included here. Somewhat a variation between products. For example, in timber products, more likely to be cutoff dates before 2005 due to earlier FSC cutoffs. So lots of data in here. We've done a joint report with CDP on this and a couple of other topics, this is drawn from. It's available on the AFI website if you're interested in seeing more of these data. But just to take home is that cutoff dates are being used. There's a huge variability in when they are between commodities, across commodities, et cetera. So working to get sort of further consistency and uptake of sort of agreed upon dates is really useful. And I think I have one final slide, which is we also have questions about how cutoff dates are used in emerging climate, nature, and regulatory targets. So some quick highlights on those. So the Science-Based Targets for Nature recently released a draft of a no conversion of natural ecosystems target. This target uses a cutoff date of 2020 for all ecosystems. So forest on forest cutoff date of 2020. They're providing a baseline map of natural ecosystems based in 2020 to support that cutoff date. In the new EU deforestation regulation, the cutoff date is 2020 for deforestation specifically. I know that there's ongoing scoping of inclusion of other ecosystems, but that's not yet online. One big sort of thing that stands out as different is that the land use change emissions accounting space uses a different approach to assessment period, which is this 20-year look back date. So the greenhouse gas protocols, land sector and removals guidance, and the SBTI flag guidance, when you're accounting for land use change emissions, usually have a look back period of 20 years. So 20 years prior to the reporting year for shorter rotation crops. For crops with a rotation longer than 20 years, there's a longer look back. We've produced guidance together with the flag and GH protocol team on how companies can align their assessment of deforestation and conversion with their assessment of land use change emissions to try to smooth over this difference in accounting, make it easier for companies to do both in tandem. So that guidance is also available on our website, and I can drop it in the chat when I'm done. All right, well, thanks so much, and happy to take questions later.
Excellent, thank you so much, Leah. I'm sure This has raised a lot of questions. Feel free, everyone, to post your questions in the chat. Maybe that we can answer them as we go, rather than waiting for the end. So next, I'd like to call in Leandro, who's the scientist at the Nature Conservancy for the Zero Conversion Commodity Strategy. Leandro, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Rafael. Thank you for having me. And I have been working in Tennessee mostly to work with companies to convince those companies to take no deforestation or no conversion commitments and help them to implement those commitments. So I have been working with this for a while, and I have most of my experience coming from Brazil, but some experience in other countries as well. What I'm going to do is to touch some points that Leah already mentioned and dig a little deeper and talk about the technical challenge to define and implement commitments. So talking first about the date itself, as Leah mentioned, the date defines what you consider a deforestation or conversion-free product. So it's essential in the entire discussion. Could you go back just, I'm going to go to there in a bit. So about the definition of the dates, as Leah mentioned, the AFI recommends that for zero deforestation commitments that the cutoff date be no later than 2020. But you have situations on you're trying to define commitments for other types of ecosystems, and how to define this is really critical. So as Leah mentioned, defining it's better to have at least a date that's close to the commitment, a little bit in the past to the commitment. The more in the past that you go, the more complicated it gets because you have more non-compliance in the supply chain, and also can be considered unfair if the producers that are linked in that supply chain legally deforest in an area, expecting to use, and then the commitment comes and you cannot sell. So taking the cutoff dates too much in the past can be complicated, but at the same time it creates the urgency to most of the companies to have those commitments and to implement as soon as possible. In my view, the best time to define a cutoff date is pretty much a little bit earlier than the commitment itself, so it's a little bit more fair, but it also has the issue that the commitment date can be always delayed, and you don't have the urgency to act. And one thing that we cannot admit is future cutoff dates in the future, because it also they are going to be stimulating deforestation, and that's something that we cannot take at all. So once you have the cutoff date, the cutoff date will have an effect on your base suppliers and how much of your suppliers are going to be in compliance or not. So I'm going to give you an example. Could you put the table now on the screen? So I took the entire Cerrado soy area in the Cerrado, for example. So this is based on the soy area in the soy area in Cerrado in 2022. And what you see in the column in the middle is how much of that soy was deforested converted in each year. So in 2021, from the entire area of soy, only 0.15% were deforested in 2021, 0.62% were deforested in 2020, and there it goes. And the first thing that is really important to realize is that the deforestation is an uneven process. It doesn't occur in the entire landscape. It always have a frontier, and this frontier moves on as it goes. And it's always localized. So for any given time, most of the production of any commodity would be considered deforestation or conversion free based on a recent deforestation date. So if you take like a deforestation date of 2020, would be in the end of the 2020, so only 2021 deforestation would be considered, only 0.15% of the soil in the Cerrado would be considered non-compliant. And the amount of non-compliant soil, it doesn't increase a lot over time. So you see, if you take, if you would like to set up cutoff date in, I don't know, 2016, 3% of the entire production would be non-compliant. So one of the factors that a lot of companies say that that's going to be too economically impossible, restrictive to define cutoff date or have a zero deforestation commitment with 2020, for example, is not true, because the effect is going to be pretty much small. Of course, the effect increases over time, and as much as you delay or a decision or use a cutoff date in the past, the more of your supply base is going to be in non-compliant. It's important to say that this doesn't say that the deforestation supply chain is small, but there's always a comparison between the actual deforestation year by year and the entire area that is being used for a specific commodity. So besides that effect of the date, could you turn off the slide, please? The implementation of the cutoff date needs to take taking in account several issues. And one thing that's important to say is that remote sensing, which is being used for monitoring the compliance with cutoff dates, is not perfect. So you always have problems. You have cloud cover at some points. Sometimes if you define a cutoff date for one specific season, it's going to be hard to define what's in compliance, what is not. And that's going to affect a lot how that's going to be implemented. For some ecosystems, you don't have data available. You need to create new data, so that can increase costs. And overall, for the commitments that are already in place, they always try to use public data sets. So taking the example of the Amazon soil moratorium, since they start, they use PRODIS data, which is a Brazilian data set that's approved by Brazilian government, that shows what's the deforestation is in the Amazon. And they have been using that since 2006. That's the original cutoff of the Amazon soil moratorium, that now changed to and then after they changed to 2008, but that's for another thing. But it's always important to use public. It's a good thing to use public data sets, because it allows more transparency about what the data is being used, and usually those data sets are already checked about accuracy and other issues. So it's easier to understand the good and bad things of those data sets. In other situations, you need to start from the scratch. So now that we are discussing the implementation of the EU regulation, it's going to be a big challenge to define a baseline for the entire forests in the tropics, which is the goal of the law. So the regulation will use one specific definition of forests, which is the FAO definition. And you're going to need to create a product, a GIS product, that reflects that definition and could be set as a baseline. So the EU seems to be working on that, and that's going to be good to have something that is a data set that's going to be available and that's going to define exactly what's in the agreement and what is not. One of the things that it's also important when you're defining the commitment and defining the cutoff date is to see if you have already capacity to monitor what you're pretending to protect. A good example of that, which is an issue today, is in the soil moratorium, because the soil moratorium in the Amazon uses, as I mentioned before, a PRODIS data, and the PRODIS just monitor forest. It doesn't monitor other ecosystems. But the original idea of the Amazon soil moratorium was to protect any natural ecosystem in the Amazon. And what we have now is that The soil moratorium is very, very efficient, has been in place for more than 15 years, but it never monitor the open areas in the Roraima state, for example. And you have a lot of deforestation that happened there. It's supposed to be included in the commitment, but now you have an issue about how you're going to make those areas to comply after so many years. So it's important to have that in mind when you're establishing the commitment. In the cutoff date, you have capacity for monitoring.
Leandro?
Sure.
I hate doing this, but we'll have to wrap up just because the 10 minutes are over already. If you can just maybe highlight the key message, and we can come back to it in questions.
Sure. Could you put the last slide? And I want to finish very quickly. So could you press the button several times just to finish the animation? So this is the common behavior of a commitment. So you have a start, you have a lot of deforestation, you have the commitment, and the deforestation decreases, and you have the stability later. One thing could you press one more time? As much as important to have the cutoff date and the monitor, the sign to the market needs to be very, very clear. So you see here, what I want to show this is that the deforestation caused by in the soil moratorium, it started in 2006, long before that you have monitoring system in place that started in 2008. So what really makes the deforestation stop in the soil moratorium at the beginning was the clear signal for the companies that they wouldn't buy anymore after the cutoff date. So as much as important that you have a cutoff date, the companies doing the commitment needs to signal very strongly to the market that they are going to enforce that, and that's the thing that's going to really make the commitment works. Sorry about the time.
No, thank you for wrapping up, and we understand it's a complex topic, and behind a very simple, or what seems to be a simple definition, hides a very highly complex reality. But we can come back to it in questions, and please I invite everyone to post your questions in the chat or raise hands at the end. We'll have time for questions. Also, just to rename yourself with the organization if possible, so that we know who we have in the audience. Now I'd like to invite Pedro, our last speaker. Pedro Moracosta is the CEO of Sustainable Investment Management and the founder of the Responsible Commodity Facility. He will present us the challenges and solutions he found to set up his own cutoff dates. Pedro, floor is yours. And you've got 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Rafael. I have to start by saying that I'm not an expert in cutoff dates, but what I'm doing is actually having to implement one. So let's start with the slides, please. Yeah, essentially, in particular, I'm running a fund to promote the production of zero deforestation soy. So the issue of a cutoff date or lack thereof is important. But I'm just gonna, talk a bit more widely about other challenges of blending finance, but very much in passing. Next. The question of blended finance, when we first hear about that, isn't that fantastic? I mean, you're combining a lot of complementary objectives, complementary sources of funding to really cater to the multi-faceted needs of a sustainable investment enterprise of some sort. However, when you actually start implementing that, you could end up and often end up in mixing also conflicting objectives. It's far too many objectives, and sometimes they are not complementary, but conflicting. And it's often the case that it results in redundancies, repetitions, or even these contradictions, as I mentioned. Next one. As I mentioned, the initiative I'm running at the moment is called the Responsible Commodities Facility, which is a fund to support the production of zero deforestation soy in the Cerrado. Our approach is to provide low interest credit lines as an incentive for farmers to stop deforesting for the expansion of soy. There's far too much to clear the land that is already cleared and available for soy, so it's not imperative that such conversion takes place. And the RCF is, was designed to be a delivery mechanism for Cerrado Manifesto, the CFA, the TFA, the CGF, the SOS, and the Brazilian NDC, a complete soup of letters. So as you can imagine, there in itself, each of these organizations have their own view of the world of what is essential to include in this in this blended pot. Next. And when designing the facility's eligibility criteria, I mean, what farmers have to do to join the facility and be eligible to these low interest credit lines. The main one being no deforestation, and the second one conservation of excess legal reserves, etc. But then we design an ENS framework with the UN environment. And in turn, we incorporated also the requirements, or tried to incorporate the requirements of all the parties and supporting organizations that are involved with this, with the CGFs, be it the Consumer Goods Forum, the Forest Positive Coalition, the IFAC, which is TFA, TNC, and UNEP, Good Growth Partnership, WWF, CI, TNC, and TNC itself has its own criteria for soy. The Climate Bonds Initiative, I mean, I was involved in the creation of the agricultural standards for CBI bonds. I mean, we tried to certify it with CBI. Everybody asked for the IFC list of criteria. And in the end, even BNP Paribas had just come up with their own criteria that had to be overlaid into everything else. It's interesting that if you're doing a green bond, you are over-regulated. If you're doing a conventional bond to fund oil and gas explorations, often you don't need to do any of that. Next. Examples of contradictions then, I mean, and it's something that we talked to UNEP at the time, and I love to do at some stage, is really to get, for instance, one of these or different initiatives and the standards that they try to comply with. And list in a big spreadsheet, line by line is a requirement. And then often you will be able to visualize that some of them are, contradictory to others. For instance, we, the buzzword with a land use, environmental sustainability crowd is a landscape or jurisdictional impacts. We want to see a jurisdiction changing as a whole, expelling its black sheep out of that. At the same time, investors want us to diversify risk. We try to get insurance for this fund, and the insurer had the brilliant idea of saying, yeah, of course we can do that, provided that you don't have more than one farm per Brazilian state. I mean, given that the Cerrado is probably the size of Europe, we could only have something like 6 farms. And we currently have 36. The second one is that what is the objective of a zero deforestation fund? Is not to source nice soy which didn't come from deforestation. It's really to contribute to a current trend of deforestation. And if you have a current trend of deforestation, you have a problem with past cutoff dates. Basically, there's no additionality anymore. I mean, you're giving medals to champions of the past rather than providing incentives to stop current trends. Next one. I don't know why I have this slide here. I think everyone in the call probably is aware of all these dates. It's confusing for those trying to implement this blended finance, green finance initiatives to start with, to understand, to be aware of all these cutoff dates, but often to do something that pleases all of them. As you can see, the Climate Bonds Initiative out there that we wanted to certify, it had a cutoff date of 2010. And the Responsible Commodities Facility and its supporters adopted a cutoff date of 2020. So there in itself, you say, well, do we go back to 2010? If we go back to 2010, we have no impact in deforestation. that has been taking place, as Leandro shown, since that date. Next. So we understand, and Leah described very well the objective, the merits of adopting cutoff dates. You establish a deadline for the adoption of certain standards. Enough is enough. And from that point onwards, we only buy, no deforestation. And as Leandro put, for instance, a good example is the Amazon moratorium had a fantastic impact, the RSPO, etc. So provided it is well designed, the adoption of cutoff dates could result in very positive environmental impacts. At the same time, next, cutoff dates could also have a negative impact. If they are dated retroactively, going exactly the opposite of Leah emphasized that they always have to be retroactive, but you may not be able to inflict any impact in the future. For instance, the Climate Bonds Initiative, the CBI cutoff date of 2008, 2010, resulted that no green bond finance can be used to provide financial incentives to farmers that are currently, in the case of Brazil, legally deforesting. And they will continue to legally deforest because they're legally authorized to do that unless they are rewarded for foregoing these legal rights, and paid by those that value the environmental services that are provided in their forests. Some donors, for instance, FMO had the 2008, they were very interested in the responsible commodities facility, but basically they were bound by the 2008 deforestation cutoff date, and means that no concessional finance can be used to stop current deforestation. And finally, the EU. Okay, I know the EU is currently looking at forests and not Cerrado, but let's assume that the EU then recognizes the Cerrado, which they should, but it means that the 2020 date means that no trading of soy from areas that are deforested after 2020, even if it was a legal deforestation. So it means that we become orphans of instruments to deal with areas of residual native vegetation that remain at risk, because there are still markets for these areas. Europe and the US are not the only markets for agricultural commodities. Indeed, China imports about 70% of Brazilian soy as opposed to what comes here. Next.
But Pedro, may I invite you to wrap up? The time is up. Sorry about that.
Yeah, this is the final slide, I think. So basically, in summary, I mean, in some cases, the best cutoff date is the present. So essentially, do you want to benefit from a given program, be it trading, be it green finance, be it environmental, payment for environmental services? Come on, join us, and you only benefit from that from the point that you join, but you only penalized if benefits only start, and your obligations only start when you join. Essentially, we feel that there has to be a free prior information to those that will be subjected to this. And in many cases, we're here kind of, creating obligations for those that haven't even kind of had a seat at the table any point in time, and all of a sudden they are threatened or affected by such requirements. That's all.
Great, thank you so much, Pedro. I think that's, what it makes me reflect on is that the legal discussions are just taking too long, because the 2010 compared to the 2020 is exact 10 years for the politicians to agree on a cutoff date, while a lot of deforestation actually happened around the 2010s years in many countries. So I think that's super useful to share these lessons. Thank you so much. May I now invite Joanna to introduce our surprise guest, maybe, and run the discussion and moderate the Q&A. And again, feel free, everyone, to post your questions in the chat. I'm hoping those 3 presentations have triggered some reflections on your end.
You can remove my slide if you feel like it.
Thanks, Mika, and thanks to all the speakers as well. That was a really interesting mix of presentations and insights there. So yes, now it comes to me now to moderate the Q&A session. So please do get thinking and pop any questions in the chat, or raise your hand shortly to come in and ask your own question. I know we've got lots of familiar names on that list, so come on, stick your neck out and ask something interesting, and or maybe contribute for your own experiences. I know we've got some very experienced people here, so happy to hear your own reflections on this as well. And on that theme, we did actually have one fund reach out to us in advance of this who have done a lot of work themselves thinking through their own policies on deforestation cutoff dates. So I'd like to invite Marta from Anne Green, or Sail Ventures on behalf of Anne Green, to share some reflections now from their perspective. I'll just add there we go, over to you, Marta, to share some reflections on what you've heard and how it relates to your learning.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Joanna, and thanks to the whole team for organizing this webinar on a very important topic, I think. I recognized a lot of what previous speakers have said, so that was great to hear. So yeah, I'm Marta Tollenaar. I work for Sail Ventures. We manage the Anne Green Fund, and Anne Green was established in 2017, so not that long ago, to decouple or de-link commodity production from deforestation in the tropics. So we operate throughout tropical landscapes across the world, and invest in supply chain actors or commodity producers with the aim to reduce deforestation or stop deforestation in their operations and in their supply chains. So cutoff dates are very much top of mind for us, and we have recently developed our own forest and biodiversity framework using all the standards that we've seen today, using the accountability framework, the IC performance standards, etc., the whole alphabet soup, as Peter mentioned, to sort of come to an approach. And that approach is not a standardized cutoff date, because, as I said, we operate across the globe and across different commodities with different standards. So our approach is really to set guidance for consultants, external experts that are going to set a cutoff date for us. And those guidelines are based on all the guidance and all the standards that we've seen today, but also include a commercial and feasibility component. So referring back to Pedro's point on, you don't want to disincentivize or fully exclude non-compliance, if that means that they are then excluded from access to any sustainable market in the future. There's a real risk in doing that. And the Anne Green Fund is all about transitioning sectors away from deforestation. So we really want to incentivize that transition. And I think cutoff days need to be carefully set in order to manage that transition and support that transition rather than disincentivize it. So yeah, once that cutoff date is set, I think maybe 2 points to be made in addition to what has been discussed already. One is to also include other parameters, not just the cutoff date, but also, for instance, how big is the area of deforestation that needs to be considered, right? There are regulatory, there are policies, etc., that advise on that. Some as large as 25 hectares consecutive, some an aggregate of 6 hectares. Those kind of parameters also need to be included in how you assess deforestation. So that's something we sort of take as a bundled approach to understand what we look at. So I think, yeah, also useful to maybe hear from others how they have approached that. And the other item I wanted to mention is then, what kind of commitments do you ask? So suppliers that have deforested in the past, how do you make sure that there is commitments on reforestation? How do you monitor those, and particularly with suppliers in very large supply chains or varying supply chains? How do you make sure that they follow through on those commitments so that indeed that transition is made possible? I think, yeah, those are questions that we, with each of our clients, work through. But I would welcome any feedback or thoughts on those 2 items as well. So thanks a lot.
Fantastic, thank you, Marta. Really interesting to hear from another fund on the kind of practical challenges around this. Yeah, although there's some very clear guidance, obviously a lot of strategy in there as well. So I've seen a few questions in the chat, which I'll go to now, but if other people have questions, either raise your hand or just drop them in the chat as well, and we'll come to them too. I've just brought in our panelists back on for questions. Let me just get my list up. So I'm doing lots of technical dealing in the background as well. So there was a quick question from during your talk, Leandro, so we'll just get that quickly clarified, from Joyce Brandau from the University of Cambridge. Was just wanted to clarify whether the figures you showed related to direct soy Cerrado conversion, and just a little clarity around those, and then we'll move on to some others.
Those are not direct. There is not deforestation caused by soy, but pretty much just check the compliance of the current soy area and where the wind is deforested. Because if you define a cutoff date, it doesn't really matter if the area was deforested to plant a specific commodity or not. What matters is if it's it was deforested before or after. The attribution is more complicated.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for clarifying. And then we've got a couple of questions coming from Julian. Actually, maybe Julian, would you like to come on and just speak? Are you happy to unmute and just speak your questions? Save me.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I was wondering, because I follow deforestation policies of clients for Société Générale, so a financial institution in France. And we've seen in the past year, Tropical Forest Alliance, having commitments in the context of the COP, the different COPs with the roadmap to follow a 1.5 degree scenario. And we see that they have defined a roadmap. And I can't help but notice, but the definition of what deforestation means, what conversion means, seems to be slightly different from what the accountability framework suggests. For example, in palm oil, we see that conversion is only restricted to no new development on, so no conversion is no new development on peatlands, regardless of depth. For soy, this definition is to be developed by end of 2023, but most soy trader policies, they only mention conversion of native vegetation. So I was wondering if this is sufficient compared to what the accountability framework has published.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll say that we do have some guidance on sort of applying the AFI definitions in contexts. But so to the agri-traders roadmap, the palm definitions for deforestation and conversion are aligned with the framework. They include both deforestation, which aligns with our definitions of deforestation. And we have, after some analysis, have said that in the palm sector, sort of the existing NDPE commitments, which is sort of no deforestation and no peat development, does sort of encompass pretty much the spectrum of conversion that is occurring for palm, and therefore a commitment to no deforestation and no palm would be aligned with a no conversion commitment. Or sorry, no deforestation and no peat would be aligned with a no conversion commitment as per the framework. So the palm component of the agri-traders roadmap does appear to be aligned with AFI's definitions for palm, around, because they also have the deforestation definition in addition to that sort of conversion being the peatland definition. In soy, it's a lot vaguer what the companies have put together in this roadmap. So the AFI says that in Brazil, the existing definition of native vegetation is aligned, basically no conversion of native vegetation as per existing definitions is aligned with what we would consider no conversion policy. So if the traders were willing to use those existing definitions, that would be aligned with, in Brazil, would be aligned with AFI's asks around no conversion. However, the traders have sort of stopped short of doing that and have requested sort of additional analysis and investigation as to what they would consider to be implied in a no conversion context. They are supposedly coming back in a year with further detail on what they mean by that. So that's definitely something that we're watching really closely to see whether they come back with something that feels appropriate or not. But if they were to use the existing sort of no conversion of native vegetation that would be aligned. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. And maybe the second question I had is on the cutoff date that is mentioned for soy in the Tropical Forest Alliance. They mentioned that the cutoff date must be established no later than 2025, and I'm actually surprised because now I see in your presentation that it is not exactly what you suggested, that this cutoff date should be in the past, and this would actually stimulate deforestation until 2025.
Yes, absolutely, and we're sort of believe that component of the roadmap is very misaligned with our expectations, and we've been working with them to improve that. And indeed, many of the individual traders do have much stronger policies than that already in place, already than what's in that soy roadmap. But yes, that the component around the soy cutoff dates is fully misaligned with the accountability framework in that document.
Thanks.
Great, thank you very much to both Julian for the question and Leah for your answer. Leandro or Pedro, did you have anything else to come in on that? If not, we'll move on to the next question. That's fine. Great. Oh, great question just come in from Annie around having reliable data there. Annie, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, well, thank you for the really interesting presentation so far. So I was interested in on Leah's and Leandro's perspective on Leah, you mentioned the issue of that there's still some the methods for monitoring conversion of non-forest ecosystems are still developing. However, the sort of global good practice is to already for companies to set non-conversion commitments. So I wanted to sort of get your perspectives on how companies should set those kinds of commitments and particularly monitor those in this current state where there isn't as reliable data for non-forest ecosystem conversion as there is for forest conversion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I might give a really quick sort of global overview on that and then turn to Leandro or Pedro for the sort of South America perspective. But so globally speaking, there's a pretty big distinction, I think, between our understanding of the dynamics in sort of some key South American biomes and the dynamics in other non-forest ecosystems elsewhere. And that's something that we're working really hard to sort of clarify the distinction, where in much of South America, there have been ongoing monitoring systems. There are good land use, land cover mapping products that make this distinction fairly clear. And I'll leave that there for others with more expertise to talk about. But it is true that in some parts of the world, there is less precise and accurate data on land cover transitions between, for example, native natural rangeland and an improved pasture in Africa and Australia. You know, there's a lot of work being done in Northern Europe, for example. There's lots of places where there's still a lot of questions around what exactly is considered conversion. In many cases, it's a value question. It's sort of saying, okay, how degraded can a pasture be before we decide that it's no longer a natural ecosystem? Can it be converted? Can it not, et cetera? So there are still some open questions that many folks in the FI Coalition are actually currently working to try to resolve. WRI is working on a bunch of products to try to help resolve some of these questions elsewhere in the world. So to say that, you know, in some parts of the world, there are still some uncertainties around the margins as to what's considered to be conversion in some cases. I think, to be honest, that those cases are fairly marginal, and that in most cases we do have a reasonable understanding. So that's sort of the global perspective.
Great. Maybe Pedro, do you want to add on what you've been doing to practically monitor for RCF?
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Cerrado versus soy contrast is very clear. I mean, it's no big deal. And as Leah put, I guess that for the majority of types of vegetation, I mean, she gave a good one, kind of managed or not managed, kind of pasture land and so on. I mean, in general, you can pick it up. I mean, there are problems in the margins, and we have to adopt a level of. We shouldn't, you know, there has to be materiality in our decision making. I mean, we can't use the lack of perfection as an excuse not to act. And I think that the technology is there for the majority of that, except kind of, you know, errors in the margin. I mean, in the case of Cerrado, it's really easy.
Great, Thank you, Pedro. I'm conscious of time. So, Leandro, if you have any thoughts on that question, and then maybe, no? There's one question in the chat from Lucy around kind of the different approaches from AFI and TNC, and then RCF SIM around setting those cutoff dates, around being sourcing policy versus financial incentives. Do you want to quickly contribute on that, Leandro?
Sure. Just to be clear, I have a position much closer to Pedro than anything else. So what I say it's that it should be just before the commitment is made, so you can be sure that is fair. I think that if you take to take cutoff dates too much in the past, like
We lost you.
We lost you, Leandro. Okay, in that case, I'll hand over to Raphael to bring this to a close. Apologies to Leandro.
Yes, thank you. Oh, but Pedro, did you want to add? Did you want to add anything? I see you were about to speak, so
I was. I guess that the only comment is that the parties that will be affected by a cutoff date have to be informed that there will be a cutoff date, and it's completely true. And I agree with Leah that when we're having discussions with big, palm oil producers and traders and kind of retailers and so on, everyone was at the table. When you get to the individuals, the individual farmers that they may be aware of the local legislation, but they are not necessarily aware of international negotiations that take place so far away from them. So, and some of them, especially in the case of Brazil, that allows for legal deforestation, what we feel is that, hey, we need to think better about how to introduce something that is so impacting on them.
Great. So I'm sorry, I have to close here, and so I've got 1 minute just to make a few announcements. Anyway, I wanted to thank you all speakers. It's been a super interesting discussion. I actually learned a lot. It was an interesting mix of insights, lessons. We understand it's a complex topic and needs to be applied in context, as it depends very much on the commodity, the sector, the landscapes. We understand some dates are conflicting, and it's an ongoing discussion. I like what you said, Pedro, on the best cutoff date is the present. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is what we need to take home. In any case, as next steps, this is just a start of a webinar series, as I was saying in introduction, so we'll have more. We've got a coming up webinar on carbon and biodiversity credits in May. Others later in the year. We'll be announcing all this through the ESCN LinkedIn group. So for those of you who are not yet part of this group, may I invite you to join us. That will be a good platform to continue today's discussions and more. The ESCN LinkedIn group is the preferred area where we exchange lots of information on ENS knowledge and exchange. We'll also be posting on this LinkedIn and on our platform case studies that we work on right now. We're looking at extracting more lessons learned on ENS framework from Agri3 and RCF. We'll be producing templates, guidance note, briefing notes later in the year. So lots to come up in 2023. So stay tuned. Check the links in this Zoom if you haven't done so. And thank you again to all speakers and contributors for this interesting discussion. Have a good afternoon. Have a good day where you are.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.